It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting at emailrevealer.com. Or you can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, check out our new Patreon. We just got a new Patreon up, and we're using it to help support the show. I just put up there the whole deposition, the Ghislaine Maxwell deposition that just came out this morning, and we threw it up on our Patreon channel for free for everyone. But there's all kind of exclusive content on there that you can't find for anyone. Exclusive 8 hours a month for free that we put up there for our Patreon members. But if you like our show, you want to check out the archives. Our guest today, Jean Guerrera, is in our archives talking about her book, Hate Monger, the story about Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the white nationalist agenda. We had her on here before for an hour talking about her book, Hate Monger. Excellent book, very well received, very knowledgeable woman, award-winning journalist all over the place. Jean Guerrera, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Ed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming back, too, as well. I really enjoyed our last talk. And I enjoy following you on Twitter, too. Great stuff. Always great content putting up there.
Thank you.
But remind the audience, who is Jean Guerrera?
Well, I am an investigative journalist, and I've been covering the immigration issue and border issues for the past 10 years or so. And I was covering immigration from day one of the Trump administration, and I began to really start to be curious about Stephen Miller, the man who was shaping the immigration policies, because I was seeing firsthand the family separations at the border. I was interviewing people, parents who had come here fleeing violence, fleeing death threats, and who then found themselves being, having their children torn from their arms by U.S. border officials. And I really wanted to understand what was going on and why the government was doing this, and that's why I wrote Hate Monger. But before I wrote Hate Monger, I wrote my first book, Crux, which is completely different. It's more of a family memoir that focuses on my relationship with my dad.
Right, so you have a personal stake in this, and seeing these freedom seekers, people with hope and dream in their eyes, hoping to cross the border for a better life. Because you experience, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, because I grew up on the border. I grew up crossing the border. I have many immigrants in my family. My father is an immigrant from Mexico, and so I mean, this story was probably the most personal story to me, the family separations. I mean, I know from experience what it's like to be separated from a parent and to not know where they are. My experience is very different, obviously nowhere near as traumatic as what these children were forced to endure. But, there were years of my life where I didn't know where my father was. And so I know what that fear, that anxiety is like. And I know the long-lasting scars that it leaves.
Yeah, so do I. The other way around, through divorce and custody, there was 30 days when I couldn't see my daughter when she was only 5 years old, and it scarred both of us ever since. It was 15 years ago. We're together now. She's in the other room annoying the hell out of me, but things move on. Thank God for that.
For sure.
I know.
Thank God.
But it is painful. It's painful, and you could just imagine these poor little children don't really speak the language in a foreign country and institutionalized, and now their parents are missing.
Exactly.
Horrific.
Yeah, I mean, they arrive in this country that they don't know anything about. They think it's going to provide them with safe refuge, that they're finally going to feel safe, and suddenly they find themselves alone and with with people that speaking a language that they have no familiarity with.
Now, in the past couple of days, a report came out where it describes how, and I think they came up with a number like 545 or 555, some specific number of children who they can't account for where their parents are. They can't count. They can't. They're admitting in the report they can't count. Okay,
exactly.
Right. But they come up with a number 545. So if they come up with this number 545, that's got to be double that. They've lost track of the parents. And give some background on what that is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe that it's probably more thousands. I mean, probably more than 1,000 children who've been permanently their, and the reason is policy, the zero tolerance policy went into effect in early 2018. There was already, the stage had already been set for family separations to begin as early as January of 2017, when Stephen Miller wrote executive orders for Trump that basically gave the Department of Homeland Security, so ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as CBP, Border Patrol, it gave them free rein to detain and deport any immigrant in their custody, regardless of the seriousness of their crimes. And what this did is, it eliminated the system of prioritization that existed under the Obama administration, where they, if it was a family seeking asylum and they passed a credible fear interview where, they're interviewed about why they fear going back to their country. They provide evidence. If they pass those interviews, they're normally released on parole and allowed to wait for their court date with family members who sponsor them in the United States. But he eliminated that. And what that did is that, Border Patrol and ICE officials began to detain anyone who came across the border, whether they were presenting legally at ports of entry or whether they were crossing illegally. And because there is this thing called the Flores settlement, a consent decree by a federal court that said that children can only be detained up to a certain, I think it's about 30 days maximum. They had to start separating the children from the parents to allow for this, just obsessive detention policy that Stephen Miller started in January 2017. So even before anyone was talking about family separations, there were family separations happening, and nobody was keeping track of them because Stephen Miller had not coordinated with the cabinet secretaries or really anyone in the bureaucracy to make sure that this was done right, that this was done in a way where they could later reunite the families. There was no system for tracking the children once they were sent over to the Office of Refugee Resettlement Agency, and keeping track of their parents within ICE and which child corresponded to which parent, because Stephen Miller wasn't interested in any of that. He was interested in doing the most traumatizing thing that he could to these families in order to deter further family migration from Central America. That was the intent of this policy all along, to traumatize and scare as many families as possible so that the message would go back to Central America. Do not go to the United States, otherwise you might be separated or perhaps even permanently from your child. And this is what ended up happening. Hundreds of parents were deported back to Central America without their children. And now we have a situation in which, at least a few hundred children, they can't find their parents. And it's probably far larger than that, and is continuing to grow because of the fact that even though a federal judge in San Diego ordered that the administration stop its family separation policy, those executive orders that Stephen Miller wrote in January of 2017 remain in play, which means that we are still seeing escalated family separations at the border, and because it's not an official policy, it's not really being reported, but it continues to happen, and these children are being lost.
Now, the thing is, many people, you gave a very thoughtful, educated reply there, but so many people that'll just drift right over their heads. And their response will be, well, Ed, just tell them to follow the legal process, and then they won't have their kids taken away. They won't be separated. Is there any violation of the legal process for someone to cross the border and present themselves to a U.S. Border Patrol agent for asylum?
So that's a very good question. I'm glad you bring it up. So there's two different things here. The zero tolerance policy allegedly targeted people who crossed the border illegally, and they were prosecuting them for illegal entry. And this is why they separated them from the children while they were detained and went through the process. But the family separations that I'm talking about that started in January of 2017, these target people regardless of whether they commit any crime whatsoever. And most of these people are people who come to ports of entry. These are legal border crossings where tens of thousands of U.S. citizens cross every single day because they're doing cross-border business or tourism or whatever. And so the asylum seekers most often present there, and they say, I fear for my life. Can I come in? And usually, if they express a fear of persecution in their home country, based on federal law as well as international law, the U.S. is required not to turn them away, and so they bring them in, and then they separate them from their children, and so that is a majority of the cases. Most of the cases are people who are not laws. They as required by federal and international asylum and refugee law, and you end up separated by Border Patrol officials in the port of entry.
Yeah, then there's the additional obstacle that we had.
So these are people who have not broken law.
Right, but then there's the additional obstacle at the place where there was no judges available to process these cases, so there would be a line of people sitting on a bridge, just sitting there waiting to get in, days, no shoes, no food, no water. So they would say, well, let's just sneak around the corner there and go over the fence. Let's get in that way. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, they created a situation where there were more illegal crossings by asylum seekers because of the fact that they made it impossible to cross at the ports of entry. And it wasn't necessarily because there was a shortage of judges. There's been evidence that suggests that these were manufactured slowdowns at the ports of entry where ICE would refuse to take in new people regardless of whether they had room or not. And this created a huge backlog at the ports of entry where most asylum seekers who want to present at the ports of entry legally end up having to put their names in this notebook that that is managed by the asylum seekers themselves, where they try to be orderly about it and take turns, and it ends up taking months to even be able to ask for asylum at the port of entry. But and keep in mind, a lot of these asylum seekers, they do not feel safe in Mexico. Most of these are people coming from Guatemala, from Honduras, from El Salvador, and Mexican cartels have a history of preying on Central American migrants who often do not report things to the Mexican police because they fear deportation to Central America. So they're very vulnerable in Mexico. And Stephen Miller created a situation where they were forced to either cross illegally or wait weeks to get into a port of entry, and either way they were not guaranteed that they were not going to be separated from their children.
So right now, here we are. We're sitting here in 2020, and we know for a fact that there's at least 500, 600 kids that are separated from their parents. And in the United States of America, this is a topic that tugs at people's hearts. For years, we had that channel HLN with Nancy Grace, right? Every night, the missing kids, Danielle Van Dam and Kristen Smart, remember, in Utah, they went missing for a couple of years, and Haley Cummings and all these little children, these little girls who went missing from their parents, and then the whole country turned it upside down. So now here we know for a fact that the government themselves says that we have 500 kids that are separated from their parents. The same pain that Haley Cummings' parents or Kristen Smart's parents were going through, these parents are now going through with the missing of their kids. Are there any steps being taken? Is there a website created with the pictures of these kids so that the parents could possibly go and or the families? Because we know some of these kids have phone numbers and family members here in the United States that they're in contact with. Are any steps being taken to reunite these children with their families?
Presently, there is nothing that is being done by the federal government. There's no coordinated process to find these to reunite these children with their parents. There are NGOs and nonprofits within Central America that are independently doing what they can to try to locate these parents. I mean, many of these people come from very remote rural towns in Central America where they do not have access to cell phones, and often there's like a communal phone, and it's very hard to reach people unless you go there yourself. And so there are NGOs that are sending people out on foot to try to locate these parents and let them know, the U.S. government has your children, has your child. What would you like to do about that? But there's no concerted effort that is being made by the U.S. government right now. I mean, there was a concerted effort made to reunite several hundred other children that had been separated in 2018, led by a man named Jonathan White in Health and Human Services. He did a really great job of cleaning up the mess that Stephen Miller had created. But that was, a court-ordered process, and it appears that unless the U.S. government is told that they have to do something, that they're just going to not.
I can't imagine that even the most hard-hearted person out there, if they were aware of the true facts, like you said, that they're just seeking asylum, that they're really following the international law, and now we see families suffering and little children suffering for no reason. People have committed no crime. As much as you want to call them illegal, they've committed no crime. The most hard-hearted person would agree that this is the wrong path to be taken for any rational country. What solution would Jean Guerrero suggest to resolve this insane problem?
I get asked this question often, and I never know what to say because I'm so much on the front lines, just reporting on the actual consequences of what the government is doing, that I don't spend as much time thinking about how this could structurally be solved. I mean, we do know that if you do not address the pull factors and the push factors, this is the way that the Department of Homeland Security refers to it, push and pull factors for immigration, that you're never going to solve the crisis, and you're going to end up just having the same situation that you have now. I think certainly militarizing the border the way that we have has been absolutely the opposite of what we should have done. It has done little to actually decrease immigration flows into this country, and apparently, the goal was to stop illegal immigration, to stop drugs from coming into the country. None of that has been accomplished by militarizing the border. All that has been accomplished is thousands of deaths at the border, people being rerouted into extremely dangerous areas of the border. And this has been happening since the 90s. And it's a story that is rarely told. Every single year, hundreds of people die trying to enter the United States. They die of dehydration, they die of hypothermia. I've seen their skeletons. I've seen human remains multiple times when I've gone into the desert with, volunteer groups that try to search for the bodies of immigrants to try to give families closure. And, that is what our militarization policies have accomplished, is deaths and trauma, separations of families, and it doesn't stop, the real problem, which is, the drugs that are pouring in through the ports of entry, through clandestine tunnels as far deep as 90 feet underground. I've been inside of these places. It's the technology to detect underground cross-border tunnels is basically non-existent. So they're building this great big wall, and all it's doing is rerouting flows underground into the ocean, into the airports, into the ports of entry. And so I think that if you really want to solve the problem, first of all, I would say you need to do something about the illegal cross-border smuggling of guns southbound. Most of the weapons that are retrieved in crime scenes in Mexico were smuggled in from the United States. There are no gun stores in Mexico. The gun laws in Mexico are extremely strict. The reason you have this violence that is pushing people out of their home countries is because of weapons that were smuggled in from the United States for profit within the United States. So I guess if I was going to say where should we start, I would say that we should start there.
Yeah, fascinating, because immigration is really, it's a paperwork. You're talking about militarization at the border. It's a paperwork violation. Just they didn't fill out the form. They got people coming in from China in the airports, Kennedy Airport and stuff. They didn't fill out the form, right? Whatever. Or Canada, back and forth. People from the United States go to Canada. They can't get work papers up there. It's the other way around too. There's a paperwork crime, like you're driving without insurance, you're driving without registration. You don't solve that with the army troops with rifles and separating people and putting them in jails and separating them from their families. It's just outrageous the way we treat this paperwork violation from people who just haven't filled out the form correctly or haven't been given the opportunity to fill out the form.
Right, and the reason people rally around policies that crack down on people who've merely committed this paperwork violation is because of people like Stephen Miller who go out and insert really false and misleading information into the speeches of Donald Trump that vilifies immigrants as people who commit crimes, as people who drain resources, as people who are not good for the prosperity of the United States, when in reality the research shows the opposite. Over the years, the immigrants contribute more than they take, and this has always been the case. And they commit far fewer crimes than citizens, whether they cross the border legally or illegally. But people are misled by politicians who are looking for an easy way to get political support using the immigration issue, and they end up rallying around really cruel policies that take the lives of immigrants.
And a perfect example is one of the biggest roundups that they had that they were bragging about was arresting people who work at 7-Eleven. Arresting the 7-Eleven clerk. So just imagine. I almost went back in there and put another cup of coffee today. Thank God they saved me from the clerk behind the counter that would have gave me the wrong change or something. Oh my God. Okay, we spent a whole hour on this. If you can go to the Spreaker archive, you just Google Opperman, Spreaker, Hate Monger. It'll come right up. We did a whole hour with Jean Guerrero about her excellent book, Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. But before the last interview, I did some research on you, and I found this article that you wrote about your dad. My father says he's a targeted individual. Give us a little, and this is in Wired magazine. I have a lot of listeners who believe they're targeted individuals. I've had a lot of clients call me up on the phone who believe they're targeted individuals. What is a targeted individual?
So a targeted individual is a person who believes that they are being subjected to some kind of covert, organized torture, often through remote-controlled electromagnetic or radio wave weapons that beam voices into their heads or electric shocks into their bodies. Often targeted individuals will complain about something called gang stalking, where they feel that they are being followed either by government agents like the CIA, who are spying on them and manipulating them and intimidating them wherever they go. Often it's a little bit more complicated than straight up government agents. Sometimes it's just, crowds of people who are intimidating these targeted individuals. But they, my father believes that he's one of these targeted individuals, and he believes that the CIA experimented on him with mind control weapons, and that it is sort of a modern day MK Ultra, which is MK Ultra is an actual CIA mind control experiment that was conducted in the 1950s and 60s. They targeted prisoners, prostitutes, drug addicts, people on the margins of society who, if they were to complain, people would not take their complaints seriously. And my father thinks that because he was at one point in his life addicted to crack cocaine, that the government decided that he would make a good target for their experiments. And this is something that he's believed since I was about 10 years old. And the essay is about my quest to untangle, the reality from the fiction of what my father was saying, and then ultimately to glean insights from his conspiracy theory.
Now, when your dad started sharing this with you when you were 10 years old, so at 10 years old, did you believe him? How would you react?
Well, actually, when I was 10, he didn't share this with me. My mother told me that he had paranoid schizophrenia. I remember we visited his apartment, and it was completely destroyed. He had punched holes into the walls, trying to find microphones or hidden cameras that could explain the voices that he was hearing in his head. And he had completely torn up the carpet, pulled it off of the floor, again searching for some kind of technology that would explain what he was experiencing. So I remember the apartment, and I remember my mother telling me that my father had paranoid schizophrenia, and that's how I understood it for most of my life until I was in journalism school, and my father came back from his travels. There were several years in my life where I didn't know where he was, because he was apparently traveling across Southeast Asia and Europe trying to escape these alleged tormentors. And so he came back, and I was in journalism school, and he began to tell me what he thought was happening to him. And as his daughter and as a journalist, I felt it was my duty to investigate the possibility that of whether or not what he was saying was true. Like, even if the possibility was extremely small, I felt it was my duty to take it somewhat seriously and try to really get to the bottom of it, because my father did not sound the way that I had always thought that he would sound. He was very articulate. He was citing research and patents and just really somewhat coherent, and so I really felt this duty to take him seriously at the time.
Okay, but now you're 20 years old. You left us off. You're in the journalism school at college age. You're reunited with your dad, and he starts telling you about the MK Ultra and all this kind of stuff. You're looking into it, and he's not this wild-eyed maniac that you were led to believe. How did you go about investigating his claims?
Well, I mean, first of all, it just started with, hours upon hours of interviewing him directly and trying to create a record of what he was saying and what he had experienced, and trying to compare that to what I was reading about online. And then I decided I was going to file Freedom of Information Act requests with multiple government agencies. So I did that with the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, looking for any records pertaining to my father, or I also requested records pertaining to potential experiments similar to those that he described. I included a certification of identity from my father that he had signed, authorizing the release of any information pertaining to my father to me. And, I had learned this in journalism school. We have a right to information from the federal government, from various government agencies, and you can request it through these various ways. And so I filed those FOIA requests, and most of the agencies said that they had no such records. But what was strange is that the CIA replied that it could neither confirm nor deny the existence of any such records, citing a national security exemption. So I appealed, and I got the same response. So that was very strange, and I obviously was really creeped out by that. But then I had a few friends of mine file the same Freedom of Information Act requests for information on themselves to see if this was something that they just sent out to all requests, or if this was really a tailored response to me. And they got the same response. So I really still to this day do not know what to make of that.
Well, and your experience now, years later, because I've done FOI requests on myself with the FBI, and I know for a fact that I was arrested as part of an FBI investigation. So I know I was under investigation by the FBI. There was a case involving me. So years later now, what do you think of the accuracy of FOI requests?
Well, I mean, I think the government often will do everything that it can to not release information that it doesn't want to release. I mean, we didn't learn about MK Ultra until decades after it happened, and I imagine there were a lot of people trying to figure out what was going on, and they were just hitting brick walls, even through filing records requests. Did
your dad give you specific days, times, and locations where he felt he was experimented on initially?
He did. Yeah, he did. I mean, he gave me like exact hotel locations, exact. The dates were fuzzy with my dad because it was just such a long time ago that he was talking about. But he was able to give me general, at least the year in which he thought that something had happened. But it was hard to pinpoint exact dates because it was when we started talking about this. It was, I think, like more than or nearly. It was several years after it had happened. So it was hard to reconstruct completely, but yeah, I mean, I hit a brick wall on the records requests.
What does he believe he was the initial experiments that then caused? I guess the idea is he was initially experimented on because he was an illegal alien. If they felt he had no support base around him, and then years later they kept tabs on him to see what the effects were. Is that how it goes?
Yeah, I mean, he thought that the CIA was using these experiments to determine how effective these weapons were at manipulating human behavior. And he thought that because he was an addict, because he was addicted to crack cocaine, the government thought, well, if we can eliminate his addiction using these weapons, then we have real evidence of their efficacy, like of the fact that they're effective. So he tells me that these weapons were used in, especially whenever he would smoke crack, and that the ultimate consequence was that he ended up stopping smoking crack because it was just so awful. Like every time he would smoke crack, he would hear these government voices in his head, tormenting him, and he would feel these electric shocks in his body, and he insists that it had nothing to do with the crack, because obviously that was my first question was, well, how do you know these aren't hallucinations induced by the crack cocaine? And he insisted that it was meant to get him to stop, and ultimately that is what happened. He stopped smoking crack, But he remains convinced to this day that he was a victim of their experiments, and that they're continuing to keep tabs on him. Occasionally he feels that they are making him sick. He feels like they're making him physically sick, where he feels tired all the time. And I've met a lot of people, or I've interviewed a lot of people who have similar claims, similar experiences to what my father says, especially ever since I wrote that piece in Wired. I mean, my whole first book, Crux, was about my quest to understand my father. But when I wrote that piece, Wired, I've gotten my inbox has just been flooded with messages from people who believe that they were also targeted.
Well, I'm sure. So do I. And I've gotten these. We've gotten these kind of clients come to us back since I was a kid. Back in Brooklyn, working for a PI, and we had this woman who was convinced that the 70s blackout was caused by McDonald's, and she had all this information. And when you start, when they're very convinced and they're talking to you, they're going on and on, very elaborate theories. What other steps did you take to either confirm or discredit your father's beliefs?
Well, I traveled to Mexico City, where my father was born. I tried to retrace his entire entire life, and I traveled with him and went to a lot of these different places that he told me about being targeted. And ultimately I felt like I was going deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole, my father's rabbit hole, and that I myself was starting to lose touch with reality. And I felt like I could spend the rest of my life in that rabbit hole and trying to figure out whether my father had really been targeted. And I decided for my own mental health that I needed to use the tools of my trade to actually disentangle myself from my father. And ultimately, after filing these records requests and getting nowhere and not really being able to verify any of what my father was saying, I ended up using journalism to figure out the story of his life, and ultimately it was almost like an exorcism, like putting down on paper everything that my father said had happened to him, everything that I could figure out that actually had happened to him, and then sort of walking away from it because I just couldn't. It was leading me into a very dark place.
Yeah, I could imagine. Now, when you were traveling with your dad and you're with him 24 hours a day, was there ever an occasion where he would say to you, "Hey, Gene, it's going on right now. See that guy over there? See that light bulb? See all this stuff?" Mm-hmm. Did that ever happen? And what was your...
Yeah, I mean, there was only one well, there were a couple. I mean, there was one instance where we were in Tijuana, Mexico, and we were actually interviewing people for I was in journalism school at the time, and I was doing a homework assignment, and all of a sudden, so my dad had driven me into this place called Los Laureles Canyon, which is a squatters canyon in Tijuana, and I was interviewing people, and all of a sudden he just became very nervous, and he said that there were people that there were people watching us. And at first I thought, well, okay, maybe there's a public safety issue that my father was concerned about, and like a normal public safety issue. And so we went in the car and just left quickly before I could really look around and figure out what was going on. And then my father began to tell me that, he thought that the government was back and that their agents had been in the canyon watching us. That they were nervous about the fact that he was explaining all of this to his daughter, who is a journalist. And another time we were in a hotel in San Francisco for my sister's graduation from an art academy, and my father and I shared a hotel room, and he just kept waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, and wildly searching the room for people that he was sure were in the room with us, because he could hear them. But I didn't see anyone, I didn't hear anyone. My father looked everywhere, and I didn't notice anything off. But he just repeatedly over the course of the night just kept waking up and insisting that he was hearing the voices in that moment, and that they were in the room with us.
And the thing is, I hate to keep going out there, but there is technology that exists that could, send beams into his head and not your head at the same time. It does. It's out there. We know there's patents, like you said.
It is out there. I haven't 100% ruled it out.
Yeah.
I had to kind of walk away from it for my own mental sanity, but I would not be totally surprised if years down the line I found out that this had actually been happening to a lot of people, because that technology does exist. We know from what happened to the diplomats in Cuba that there was some weird experimenting going on with sound waves that is very similar to what targeted individuals describe. But I mean, regardless of all that, I also just feel like we should take what the targeted individuals are saying very seriously, not literally necessarily, but very seriously, given the fact that we are all, being covertly manipulated through our devices, through, artificial intelligence-based advertising, micro-targeting, our purchases, politics, preoccupations, all of these things are being shaped without our knowledge online because of the pervasiveness of digital technology and the way that we spend so much time and so much of our lives online. And so ultimately that was sort of the insight that I drew from my father's stories was, okay, well, maybe I can't get to the bottom of this particular mystery, but there's something to what he's saying that is applicable to every single person in the modern world, which is that, our free will is being slowly eroded by the fact that without our consent and without our full awareness, we're being surveilled and manipulated constantly.
Yeah, the level of data mining that goes on out there, or of our habits, our daily habits, is so beyond our imagination at this point that there does exist out there that ability, that capability of shaping us and guiding us and directing us and manipulating us, especially for financial benefit, to sell us things and to make us consume things. And then right, it's there, And then when you get into stuff like with Facebook and even Twitter, where you block other people, but Facebook has this feature of your friends. Who are your friends? And then you suddenly one day they're no longer your friends. They're your enemies. So they can data mine information from your enemies, negative information about you too as well, which never existed before. And also, too, here I am, a guy here whose people have come to me to send me their cell phones, do digital forensic on their phones and their computers. And I'm convinced I'm being spied upon by not only NASA and my aunt and my landlord and all these. You know what I'm saying? You know exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But if I was running this kind of operation, wouldn't there be a list of guys just like me in this business that I would send crazy people to discredit this whole operation, that I would be convinced that everybody who claims this is nuts, right? That would be an element I would throw in there if I was running an operation like this.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's hard to... It's hard to know how to respond, because I don't want to... I mean, I do feel like a lot of people who have these beliefs are simply suffering from the effects of, undiagnosed mental health struggles, schizophrenia, schizotypal disorder, bipolar disorder, and, there's such a stigma associated with mental health issues that a lot of people don't want to seek help. But, with my dad, like, one of the ways that we were able to approach what he was experiencing differently is, I read about this organization called Intervoice, where people who hear voices, they reject the diagnosis of schizophrenia, and they decide to embrace the voices that they're hearing in their heads, but not to interpret them literally, but rather to interpret them metaphorically. So almost like poetically, like a poem, and trying to mine those voices for insights about their lives, and not in a literal way. And so I feel like that's like an approach that I feel like should really take hold for a lot of people. I feel like that would be a very healthy approach, but also obviously, I can't entirely discount what some of these people are saying.
Right, and also in this article, which is an excellent article you can find in Wired magazine, you talk about going to your father's history of his ancestors and how there were relatives who communicated with the voices and spirits and stuff like that. Exactly. That was considered normal. Exactly. Yeah, who are Ed and Gene to question what's going on out there and come to conclusions on when things were considered at one time, this was considered natural.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, my dad's great-grandmother was a very well-respected curandera, allegedly clairvoyant. They called her La Divina, the diviner. So she experienced a lot of the things that my dad experienced, but for her it was like a gift. And now in this different context, it's seen as an illness or a curse, and people think my dad's crazy, and it's interpreted in a very different way. And I think that's part of the problem, is the fact that there's such a rejection of people who hear voices, and rather than an attempt to work with them to get some insight from what they're experiencing.
Yeah, and I don't want to be misunderstood. I have friends and I have people who listen to the show that I have a lot of respect for, that are completely sane in other ways, who come to me with this complaint that they believe that they're, and there's lawsuits and all kinds of stuff going on. And I know what counter-surveillance is. I know what counterintelligence is. I deal with it myself. I have my own problems here. So I don't want to disrespect anybody. Do you feel that your dad, if you listen to this show, would feel disrespected, or that I would... how would he...
No.
No. Okay.
I don't think he would feel disrespected. I think he might feel disappointed. He might feel like, oh God, like you're not being, you guys aren't being good enough journalists getting to the bottom of this. Like he would get frustrated with me whenever I would draw a line and tell him that I felt like he was jumping to conclusions about things. And so yeah, but no, I think that he, especially my dad's been really willing to be open with me, and knowing that I'm going to publish things and talk about it, and he's been pretty open-minded about it all.
Yeah, so much of your life has been molded by your relationship with your dad, both the absence and his influence in your life. How is your relationship with him today?
Well, so he ever since the pandemic started, he has kind of locked himself up in Rosarito, so in Baja, California, and I haven't seen him because I haven't been wanting to cross the border. There's like some restrictions to travel, and I just want to be careful about that. But yeah, I mean, this pandemic has led him to. And the way it has a lot of people to just sort of feel like they're kind of losing their minds. And so ever since I wrote the book, my dad and I became a lot closer, and, he would visit on a regular basis, and we would have lunch, have dinner, go to Tijuana and get some, go to the restaurants down there. But the past few months, I actually have not seen him. I mean, I've been in touch with him, and I know he's not doing very great. He's just not very happy about everything that's going on with the pandemic, and he's interpreting it as potentially something, manufactured by the government, and he's just not taking it very well.
Oh yeah, he's not alone in that theory either, and clearly people are taking advantage of this, and they're making billions off of it. There's a huge, currency exchange going on here, from the poor to the ultra rich. So, yeah. Gene Guerrero. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. I mean, he showed up to my book launch party and stood in the front row, and the book is just writing about him and researching him it really brought us closer together, and so I'm just really grateful for that.
Well, that's good. And anybody who listens to this show knows that I'm a sucker for a good father-daughter story. And listen to my story with my daughter and our struggle for custody and battle, and we went through for years and years and years. Gene Guerrero, the book is Hate Monger. Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. You have a website, too, as well, right?
Yeah, GeneGuerrero.com.
GeneGuerrero.com. And also you're on Twitter?
That's right. It's at JeanGuerre.
And this Wired article is called "My Father Says He's a Targeted Individual. Maybe We All Are." Gene Guerrero, thank you so much. Always delightful to have you here. Always great content, and I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much, Ed. Same for you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.